The currency collapse ignited nationwide turmoil in Iran, with external forces exploiting Starlink for infiltration. Authorities countered by cutting internet access to regain control. Amidst the interplay of U.S.-Iran tensions and Israel's dilemma, this internal-external tug-of-war has gradually subsided, yet it leaves behind deep economic wounds and social fractures. Iran's path to breaking free remains strewn with unseen reefs. As the first rays of January 14th's dawn pierced Tehran's clouds, landing on the shuttered doors of the Grand Bazaar, the streets bore little trace of the recent turmoil. Only scorched marks in street corners and lingering tear gas fumes on the pavement hinted at the intensity of the half-month-long upheaval. No one could have predicted that this popular uprising, ignited by a currency collapse, would unfold as a dramatic reversal from a raging wildfire to swift suppression fueled by external forces and met with the Iranian authorities' iron-fisted control. More thought-provoking still is how Elon Musk's Starlink, once hailed as a gleamer of freedom to break through the blockade, ultimately became a tracking lead for the regime's precise surveillance. Tehran. Late 2025, a bitter wind swept dust from the Grand Bazaar across the streets, carrying the chill of economic winter. The seeds of this turmoil had long been sown in the steadily worsening hardships of daily life. On December 28th, as the Iranian rial plummeted to a historic low of 1.42 million to the dollar, merchants in this Persian marketplace pressed the start button for protest shops. Passed down through generations closed their doors to customers. The dull, synchronized clatter of rolling shutters descending sounded like the prelude to a nationwide upheaval. These market sentinels, most attuned to economic fluctuations, voiced their despair over hyperinflation and currency devaluation through the silence of closed shops. Behind this despair lies Iran's economy, mired 4 years in a quagmire of sanctions and internal strife, a situation that has become deeply entrenched. Iran's economic predicament did not emerge overnight but resulted from the prolonged accumulation of external sanctions and internal structural contradictions. Since the United States unilaterally withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018 and reinstated comprehensive sanctions, Iran's external economic channels have been drastically restricted, with its oil exports the backbone of the national economy suffering severe blows. Although Iran has maintained some exports through underground oil markets, U.S. financial sanctions have hindered the smooth repatriation of foreign exchange earnings. According to the Central Bank of Iran's Q for 2025 report, over $116 billion in Iranian oil revenues remain frozen overseas. This capital, unable to be used for importing essential goods or stabilizing currency exchange rates, has become a fatal shackle constraining economic recovery. The 12-day war between Iran and Israel in June 2025 further exacerbated economic deterioration. Israel's precision strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities, missile programs, and air defense systems not only destroyed substantial strategic assets but also shattered international confidence in Iran's economy. This triggered accelerated depreciation of the rial, prompted foreign capital flight, and spurred domestic capital to seek overseas safe havens. By December 2025, Iran's economy had spiraled into a full-blown vicious cycle. Officially reported inflation surged to 42.2%, with food prices skyrocketing 72% year-on-year and medical supplies rising 50%. The cost of living for ordinary citizens increased exponentially. In Tehran's working-class neighborhoods, many families could no longer afford basic food staples. Queues outside bakeries stretched from dawn until late at night. While some merchants exploited the situation by hoarding goods and further inflating prices of essentials like bread and cooking oil, intensifying public discontent. Merchants in the Grand Bazaar face even more immediate hardship. Import costs have multiplied due to the currency's plunge, while domestic purchasing power continues to shrink. Many merchants find their goods unsellable even at rock-bottom prices, watching generations of accumulated wealth evaporate rapidly amid the currency's devaluation. On December 28th, coinciding with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's departure for the U.S., This sensitive timing ignited merchants' pent-up frustration. They spontaneously gathered at the Grand Bazaar entrance, holding signs reading "Save the Rial" and "End Sanctions." What began as peaceful petitions gradually escalated into protests blocking streets. Initially, Iranian authorities underestimated the protests, believing their core demands were purely economic and could be appeased with temporary subsidies. President Pezeshkian swiftly appointed former Governor Hamadi to lead the central bank, replacing the resigning Farkin, in an attempt to stabilize market confidence through a leadership change. The government also announced a 4-month monthly allowance of $7 per citizen, covering approximately 80 million people nationwide. Yet these measures proved inadequate against spiraling inflation, and exchange rates. The $7 monthly subsidy couldn't even purchase a bag of flour, failing to alleviate public hardship. More critically, the central bank lacks sufficient foreign exchange reserves to intervene in the market. Despite Hamadi's repeated assurances of exchange rate stability since taking office, he has yet to implement substantive measures. The rial continued its decline after protests erupted, plummeting from 1.42 million to 1.5 million per dollar, further eroding public trust in the government. This collapse of trust became the key catalyst for the rapid spread of popular unrest. No one could have anticipated that this grassroots movement, born of economic grievances, would spread like wildfire. What began with bazaar merchants soon drew in factory workers, university students, and urban poor. Demands quietly shifted from livelihood improvements to political aspirations evolving, from anti-inflation protests and calls for exchange rate stability into demands for government reform and opposition to external sanctions. Dissatisfaction spread from Tehran across Iran, with mass gatherings erupting in major cities like Isfahan, Mashhad, and Shiraz. Like an invisible web, the nation was drawn into a vortex of chaos. At this juncture, Iran was preparing for the January 3rd commemoration of the 6th anniversary of Qasem Soleimani's martyrdom. This spiritual symbol of resistance against external forces, once a unifying force for the regime, had become a focal point of conflict amid the turmoil. Soleimani's martyrdom remains an enduring wound in the hearts of Iranians, serving as a potent symbol for the regime to rally national sentiment and counter external pressures. By late 2025, Iranian authorities had established thousands of memorial sites nationwide, displaying Soleimani's portraits and broadcasting recordings of his speeches. Plans were underway for a large-scale commemoration on January 3rd, aiming to rekindle national identity and divert attention from economic hardships. However, the spread of protests has placed these commemorations in an awkward position. Some demonstrators believe the authorities are overemphasizing external conflicts while neglecting domestic livelihood issues, leading them to boycott the events. Meanwhile, conservative supporters of the government view the protesters' actions as a desecration of a national hero, with the opposing stances growing increasingly sharp. On January 3rd, while Tehran's memorial gathering proceeded as scheduled, its scale fell far short of expectations. In some areas, protesters and mourners faced off, signaling a more complex trajectory for the situation. The deterioration of the situation accelerated like a runaway horse in early January. On January 5th, Iranian police announced the arrest of a troublemaker who claimed to have been instructed by foreign forces to incite public sentiment through social media, spreading rumors to intensify conflicts between the people and the government. This announcement further solidified the Iranian authorities' conviction of external interference and provided justification for subsequent strong-handed control measures. On January 6th, protests at Tehran's Grand Bazaar escalated further. Demonstrators not only blocked streets but also attempted to storm nearby government buildings, forcing security forces to intervene and intensifying the standoff. Tear gas obscured the sky as rubber bullets and stones flew through the air. Shops shut down entirely, transforming the once bustling marketplace into a chaotic scene of confrontation. Shattered glass, scattered slogans, and burned-out vehicles painted a heart-wrenching picture. The next day brought an even more heart-wrenching scene. Some emotionally charged participants stormed a Sulaimani memorial square in Tehran and toppled his statue. This 5-meter-tall bronze statue embodied the Iranian people's indomitable spirit against external forces. Its thunderous collapse felt like a fissure in Iranian society being torn wide open. This act sparked fierce anger among conservative citizens. Thousands of government supporters took to the streets, clashing with protesters and further escalating the confrontation. Reza Pahlavi, exiled in the United States, seized the opportunity to issue a call to action via social media. He released a video urging Iranians to continue taking to the streets and calling for strikes in critical sectors like transportation, oil, and gas. His message, like a spark in the darkness, further ignited the unrest on the streets. As the son of Iran's last monarch, Reza Pahlavi has long sought to restore the Pahlavi dynasty from exile in the United States, though his influence within Iran has remained limited. The current wave of protests presented him with a rare opportunity. He frequently used social media to engage with the Trump administration, calling for U.S. intervention in Iran's affairs to support the demonstrators. Despite lacking unified leadership, strict organization, or armed forces functioning more like scattered sand held together solely by discontent with the status quo, Reza Pahlavi's voice provided spiritual sustenance to some protesters while offering external forces an entry point to intervene. Analysts suggest Reza Pahlavi may have backing from Israeli intelligence agencies. The traffic promotion of his social media accounts and the rhythm of his information releases bear the subtle traces of professional team operations. His interactions with Trump are seen as a significant signal seeking U.S. political support. January 8th became the turning point in this turmoil. Mass gatherings erupted across multiple Iranian cities, with participants chants piercing the sky in response to Reza Pahlavi's call, pushing the situation to its peak. According to Iranian security agency statistics, over 300 gatherings took place nationwide that day, with cumulative participation reaching hundreds of thousands. In some areas, the situation spiraled completely out of control, with a minority of extremists seizing the opportunity to cause chaos. To contain the escalating unrest and prevent total collapse, Iranian authorities decisively cut off the nation's internet and international telephone communications that night, retaining only dedicated network channels for select government departments and medical systems. This move functioned like a soundproof cover over the boiling situation, halting the rapid spread of information while severing channels for external forces to incite unrest online. This internet blackout, lasting approximately 150 hours, served as both an emergency break for authorities to regain control and an invisible wall temporarily isolating Iran from the outside world, drawing widespread international attention. However, the Iranian authorities' internet shutdown was not merely an information blockade. It also involved a precise technological gambit. External forces had long prepared for such disruptions. A January 9th report by Israel's Channel 14 added another layer to the chaos. Elon Musk had provided Starlink services to Iranians, with his SpaceX company secretly shipping thousands of Starlink terminals into the country to help protesters bypass the internet blockade. These circulating Starlink terminals functioned like faint gleamers piercing the internet blockade, establishing communication bridges for protesters while simultaneously serving as critical channels for external influence. CNN, The Wall Street Journal, and other media outlets reported that during a meeting between Trump and senior administration officials, countermeasures involving cyber interventions in Iran's protests were specifically discussed. This included shipping Starlink terminals to Iran, a strategy mirroring the Biden administration's similar cyber assistance during Iran's 2022 protests. The U.S. intended for Starlink to enable protesters to sustain online voices, disseminate protest updates, and mobilize broader public participation, while also providing communication support for agents operating within Iran. Unexpectedly, however, Starlink's involvement instead facilitated the Iranian authorities' crackdown operations. Iran had already passed legislation in 2024 criminalizing the use of Starlink satellite internet services, with penalties including fines, flogging, or up to 2 years imprisonment, providing legal grounds for authorities to target users. More crucially, Starlink terminal coverage within Iran remains extremely low. Ordinary citizens cannot afford its exorbitant costs, leaving its primary users as covert pro-Western groups, intelligence operatives, and a small number of high-profile protesters. This makes Starlink signals highly targeted. Iranian security forces employ satellite positioning and signal analysis technologies to precisely track Starlink signals within the country, pinpointing targets using Starlink terminals and enabling efficient screening and control. Tok, founder of the civil internet monitoring organization NetBlocks, revealed that while some Starlink services remain accessible within Iran, the signal is intermittent and service quality has significantly deteriorated. Iranian authorities have begun deploying equipment to directly jam Starlink signals while simultaneously conducting large-scale investigations to identify individuals possessing Starlink terminals through signal tracing. These control measures proved remarkably effective. Reports indicate that within just 2 days, Iranian security forces detained over 10,000 individuals involved in disturbances or deemed suspicious, including several foreign infiltrators. While street gathering points plummeted from over 300 to just 60, sporadic acts of vandalism failed to gain momentum. Satellite internet, once hailed by Western media as a tool of freedom, became an auxiliary means of official control amid the chaos. The U.S. plan to use satellite internet to fuel instability within Iran ultimately backfired. Under the shadow of internet blackouts, the situation transformed from peaceful gatherings to violent confrontations, ushering in comprehensive control by Iranian authorities. A handful of extremists, like vandals in the night, set fire to homes, mosques, banks, and government buildings in some cities. Flames consumed the peace of these urban centers, driving the death toll ever higher. According to Iranian state media, 111 security personnel have been killed while handling the clashes, including numerous police officers and Revolutionary Guard soldiers, who lost their lives while stopping vandalism and protecting public facilities. Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian confirmed in a January 14 interview that the death toll from related incidents has reached hundreds. Among the deceased are both protest participants and innocent civilians, including bank employees, street vendors, and residents living near the incident sites. Hospitals were overwhelmed, with emergency room lights burning through the night. Medical staff worked beyond capacity yet struggled to cope with the relentless stream of casualties. Pain and despair intertwined, becoming the heaviest footnote to this turmoil. Iran's Tasnim News agency cited security sources on January 11 stating that approximately 200 extremist leaders and operational commanders had been apprehended nationwide. Authorities seized large quantities of hazardous materials, including Molotov cocktails, from their hideouts. Most of these items were smuggled into Iran across its borders by external forces. Iranian media also reported that organizations linked to foreign forces were using the internet to teach the manufacture and use of these dangerous items, inciting extremists to carry out destructive activities. Former U.S. official Mike Pompeo's social media statement further corroborates the connection between external forces and extremists. He publicly wished participants in Iran's street protests and related personnel a Happy New Year. Although this comment was later deleted, Iranian media captured screenshots, providing crucial evidence of external interference. Iranian authorities crackdown targets not only rioters and foreign agents but also emphasizes public opinion management and social stabilization. On January 11th, Iranian state television broadcast footage from a Tehran morgue, explicitly stating that most bodies were ordinary citizens, largely victims of accidental killings during recent protests, contrary to Western media portrayals of protesters suppressed by the government. Simultaneously, the Iranian government called on citizens to report rioters, promising leniency for protesters who voluntarily surrendered and cooperated with investigations. It also provided free medical treatment for innocent civilians injured in the unrest. aiming to divide the protest groups and calm social tensions through these measures. On January 13th, the Iranian government declared 3 days of national mourning for martyrs who perished during the unrest, encompassing both fallen security personnel and innocent civilians. This move aimed to foster social consensus and ease tensions. On January 14th, Iranian authorities formally declared control over the national situation. Tehran's streets returned to calm, and protests in other major cities largely subsided. Security forces began gradually withdrawing from the streets, retaining only partial police presence to maintain order. This nationwide storm finally showed signs of abating. Yet, as the situation within Iran gradually settled, the United States across the ocean did not cease its pressure. Iran's internal turmoil had long been targeted by former U.S. President Trump, keeping a close eye on this unstable region. He repeatedly posted on social media and stated in interviews that the U.S. would intervene directly if the Iranian government cracked down on related activities. He also raised the question of whether Iran would become the next Venezuela. His ambiguous statements added another layer of uncertainty to the situation. Trump's statements essentially constitute psychological and information warfare. By continuously signaling potential intervention, he pressures Iranian authorities to refrain from taking decisive control measures. Simultaneously, he sends a message to activists that the U.S. stands behind them, encouraging them to continue their activities and even resort to extreme measures. Beyond verbal threats, the U.S. has also escalated its military deployments. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group has quietly moved toward the Middle East, transiting the Suez Canal to reach waters near the Persian Gulf, coordinating with other U.S. forces deployed in the region. U.S. bases in Qatar, Bahrain, and elsewhere have begun evacuating non-essential personnel while strengthening defensive deployments, adding more missile defense systems. These systems protect U.S. bases and also provide defensive support for Israel. On January 14th, NBC News cited sources reporting that President Trump had indicated to his national security team his desire for military action against Iran to be a swift and decisive strike, rather than a protracted conflict lasting weeks or months. This statement further heightened international concerns about a potential military clash between the U.S. and Iran. On January 15th, the U.S. Treasury Department announced new sanctions against Iran, updating its list of sanctioned individuals and entities. The list added 11 individuals and 13 entities, including Ali Larijani, Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, and commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Loristan and Fars provinces. The U.S. stated that these sanctions target individuals and entities involved in suppressing protesters and supporting terrorist activities, with measures including freezing their U.S. assets and prohibiting transactions with U.S. citizens and entities. White House Press Secretary Matt Lovett stated at a press conference that day that President Trump and his team are closely monitoring the situation in Iran, with all options on the table for the president, including both diplomatic sanctions and military strikes. This statement once again signaled a hard-lean stance. Facing sustained U.S. pressure and threats, Iran responded forcefully. Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian wrote to UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres on the 15th regarding the unrest in Iran, condemning inflammatory and threatening remarks by U.S. officials, according to a statement from the Iranian Foreign Ministry. Araghchi noted in the letter that recent unrest in multiple Iranian cities was instigated by terrorists who exploited peaceful protests over economic issues to escalate them into armed riots. He further stated that irresponsible, provocative remarks by former and current U.S. officials directly incited domestic violence and terrorist activities, and that U.S. threats of military force seriously violate the UN Charter and principles of international law. Araghchi urged the UN to condemn all terrorist acts during the unrest, as well as any external interference in Iran's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national interests. He emphasized that U.S. sanctions against Iran have precipitated the current situation. endangering the lives of Iranian citizens while exploiting peaceful protests for political ends. Iranian Parliament Speaker Ali Larijani also made it clear that if the U.S. launches a military strike against Iran, all U.S. military bases in the Middle East and facilities of its allies will be considered legitimate targets for retaliation. Iran will respond decisively, and may even take preemptive defensive actions against potential threats. Karibov underscored that Iran is engaged in a four-pronged battle against external pressures: economic, military, public opinion, and diplomatic, and will never yield to external threats or coercion. Although some analysts believe the likelihood of Iran taking preemptive defensive actions is relatively low since the June 2025 conflict, Iran's military capabilities have suffered certain losses, and its external military strategy has since been relatively low-key, seeking to buy more time to restore military capacity and enhance missile production. Iran's tough stance still demonstrates its resolve to confront external threats. As America's core ally in the Middle East, Israel's stance on Iran's situation also draws significant attention. Israel and Iran have long been adversaries, with deep-seated conflicts over nuclear issues and regional influence. Both nations share the objective of weakening the other's regional influence and even achieving regime change. Yet, differences persist between Israel and the United States. Israel lies just over 1,000 kilometers from Iran, while the United States is over 10,000 kilometers away. Should the U.S. take military action against Iran, Tehran would likely direct retaliation toward Israel. During the June 2025 12-day war, Iran launched over 600 ballistic missiles into Israeli territory, killing more than 30 Israelis. This painful lesson has left Israel highly vigilant against potential U.S. intervention in Iran. Reuters cited 3 Israeli sources on January 11 stating that Israel maintains heightened vigilance regarding potential U.S. intervention in Iran, though the practical implications of this vigilance were not elaborated. Days earlier, Israeli media reported Prime Minister Netanyahu expressing no current intent to wage war against Iran, preferring diplomatic channels and sanctions to curb Tehran's influence. This contradictory stance reflects Israel's dilemma, while seeking to weaken Iran and welcoming U.S. pressure on Tehran. Israel simultaneously fears that U.S. military action could provoke Iranian retaliation, dragging Israel into a quagmire of war. Israeli intelligence agencies are closely monitoring developments within Iran, tracking its military deployments, while simultaneously strengthening their own defensive preparations against potential Iranian retaliatory strikes. The international community also closely monitors the Iranian situation, with various parties calling for peaceful dispute resolution and opposing external interference. At an emergency open meeting of the UN Security Council on Iran on January 15, Russia's permanent representative to the UN, Nebenzia, stated that Russia condemns all forms of external interference, incitement to violence, and threats of force against Iran, and supports Iran in safeguarding its national sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. On the same day, Iranian Foreign Minister Hassan Amir Abdullahian held a telephone conversation with SCO Secretary General Almaty-Bey to exchange views on regional and international developments. Yermakbayev strongly condemned the terrorist and destructive activities that recently occurred in Tehran and other Iranian cities, expressed condolences to the Iranian government, people and families of those killed in the unrest, and reiterated the common position of SCO member states. He emphasized that mutual respect for sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity, equality and mutual benefit, non-interference in internal affairs, and the principle of not using or threatening to use force are the foundation for the stable development of international relations. The EU has maintained a relatively neutral stance. On January 14, Josep Borrell, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, issued a statement expressing regret over the casualties in Iran. He called on Iranian authorities to respect the people's right to peaceful protest while condemning all acts of violence and external interference. Borrell urged all parties to exercise restraint and resolve differences through dialogue and consultation. Some Arab nations have remained silent on the Iranian situation, neither supporting the Iranian government nor endorsing U.S. intervention. They fear escalation could destabilize the region and disrupt their own energy exports and economic development. As the situation within Iran calmed, international flight operations gradually resumed. Several airlines had previously suspended flights to Tehran due to the unrest. Starting January 11th, carriers including Emirates and Flydubai were among the first to restore flights to multiple Iranian cities. This move may indicate that regional countries assess the risk of war with Iran has decreased and the situation is gradually stabilizing. However, the U.S. stance remains uncompromising. During an interview aboard Air Force One on the 11th, Trump stated that Iran's leadership had proactively reached out for negotiations after his military threats. Yet he simultaneously warned that the U.S. might take action before any talks occur. On January 12th, Trump abruptly announced plans to impose a 25% tariff on all countries trading with Iran, aiming to further isolate Tehran through economic means. That same day, the U.S. State Department issued a travel advisory urging American citizens to leave Iran immediately to avoid security risks amid the volatile situation. Trump planned to convene a meeting with senior administration officials on January 13 to discuss the next steps in the U.S. response to the Iran situation. The outcome of this meeting will directly impact the trajectory of U.S.-Iran relations and regional stability. Reports indicate divisions within the Trump administration over Iran policy. Some hawkish officials advocate military strikes, proposing large-scale airstrikes against Iranian military targets to weaken Iran's military capabilities, while others contend that large-scale military action at this stage could undermine protests within Iran, potentially rallying the Iranian public behind the government. They recommend sustained pressure through cyberattacks, information warfare, and economic sanctions, waiting for internal Iranian conflicts to resurface. Trump himself has vacillated between various options, his statements veering between ambiguity and assertiveness, making his true intentions difficult to predict. For Iran, the calming of tensions offers only a temporary respite. The country's deep-seated economic ailments and social fractures will require considerable time to heal. Although authorities have regained control of the situation, the economic crisis remains fundamentally unresolved. While the rial's exchange rate has slightly rebounded, it still hovers at an elevated 1.45 million to the dollar. Inflation persists at high levels, and livelihood issues remain acute. While the Iranian government has introduced a series of measures to stabilize the economy, the lack of sufficient foreign exchange reserves and external support limits their effectiveness. Simultaneously, the social fractures left by the protests cannot be ignored. The antagonism between protesters and government supporters, the divergence of interests among different social classes, and differing perceptions of external forces all require long-term communication and mediation to resolve. In a nationwide address on January 15th, Iranian President Pezeshkian stated that the government would address legitimate public demands, intensify economic reforms, combat corruption, stabilize prices and exchange rates, while resolutely resisting external interference and sabotage. He called on all Iranians to unite in confronting the current challenges. Pezeshkian emphasized that Iran's destiny lies in its own hands. The nation will neither yield to external threats and pressure nor neglect the people's livelihood needs. Economic and social reforms will advance while safeguarding national sovereignty and stability. Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Araghchi stated on January 12 that Iranian security forces have brought the national situation under control. Israel and the United States bear direct responsibility for the events unfolding in Iran. Iran stands ready to engage in negotiations with the United States on the basis of fairness, equality, and mutual respect, while simultaneously maintaining war readiness. Araghchi's remarks demonstrate both Iran's willingness to negotiate and its resolve to confront external threats. The underlying message is unequivocal. The United States has missed the optimal window for intervening in Iran's affairs. With the current situation under control, Resolving differences can only be achieved through equal negotiations, not military threats or sanctions. Today's Iran resembles a ship that has temporarily found respite from a stormy sea. Domestic order is gradually being restored, yet deep-seated economic ailments, social fractures, and external threats still lurk ahead like hidden reefs. This storm, ignited by a currency collapse, ultimately stems from the intertwined consequences of internal and external contradictions, prolonged pressure from external sanctions, imbalances in the domestic economic structure, accumulated livelihood issues, and the intervention of external forces collectively fueled this turmoil. The reversal of roles in this matter, the intricate web of stakeholders, the regional country's dilemma, and the complex stances of the international community have all added further uncertainty to the situation. Whether Iran can navigate its way out of this predicament remains an unknown. If it seizes the opportunity presented by the calming of tensions to advance economic reforms, resolve social conflicts, and build national consensus, while simultaneously seeking diplomatic breakthroughs to alleviate external sanctions pressure, Iran might gradually emerge from its predicament. However, if economic hardship continues to worsen, external forces persist in intervention and provocation, and social divisions deepen, Iran could once again plunge into turmoil. The trajectory of U.S. policy toward Iran, Israel's regional maneuvers, and coordinated international intervention will all become critical factors shaping Iran's trajectory. The geopolitical dynamics of the Middle East are inherently complex and volatile, and the reverberations of this Iranian storm will continue to impact regional stability and development for a considerable time to come. This storm also reveals new characteristics of modern conflicts. Technological power does not inherently favor any single side. The transformation of Starlink from a tool of freedom to a tracking tool demonstrates that technology itself is neutral. Its impact depends entirely on its users and the regulatory environment. External powers increasingly intervene in other nations' internal conflicts through cyber operations, intelligence gathering, and proxy forces, establishing new methods in geopolitical competition. Economic hardship and livelihood issues often serve as core catalysts for social unrest. Resolving internal contradictions remains the fundamental path to safeguarding national stability. These insights hold relevance not only for Iran but also offer lessons for other nations worldwide facing similar challenges. Over time, Tehran's streets have gradually regained their former bustle. Shops in the Grand Bazaar have reopened one after another, and pedestrians hurry along as if the intense storm had never occurred. Yet only the Iranian people themselves know the pain and reflection this storm has left behind, deeply etched into every household and individual heart. The road ahead remains long. Whether Iran can overcome its difficulties and emerge from this predicament concerns not only its own destiny but will profoundly impact the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, warranting continued attention from the international community. The international energy market also experienced minor fluctuations due to the evolving situation in Iran. Brent crude oil prices surged by 3% during the unrest, driven by concerns over the security of oil shipping routes through the Persian Gulf. As the situation stabilized, oil prices gradually returned to previous levels. Gulf oil-producing nations like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait adopted a wait-and-see approach, refraining from adjusting production levels to capitalize on the turmoil, thereby maintaining relative stability in international oil prices. The deteriorating situation accelerated like a runaway horse in early January. On the 6th, tear gas obscured the sky over Tehran's Grand Bazaar as security forces and protesters reached a boiling point. Shops shut down entirely, transforming the once bustling marketplace into a chaotic standoff zone. The following day brought an even more heart-wrenching scene. Some emotionally charged participants toppled the statue of Soleimani. This symbol, laden with national sentiment, crashed to the ground, like a fissure in Iranian society being torn wide open. Reza Pahlavi, in exile in the United States, seized the moment to issue a call. From afar, like a spark in the darkness, further igniting the unrest on the streets. January 8th became the turning point of this storm. Mass rallies erupted across multiple Iranian cities. Protesters chants piercing the sky in response to Reza Pahlavi's call, pushing tensions to their peak. To contain the spreading flames, Iranian authorities decisively cut off nationwide internet and international phone communications that night, effectively placing a soundproof dome over the boiling situation. This internet blackout, lasting approximately 150 hours, served as both an emergency break for authorities to regain control and an invisible wall temporarily isolating Iran from the outside world, yet it also sparked widespread international scrutiny. Under the shadow of the internet blackout, the situation transformed from peaceful gatherings into violent confrontations. A minority of extremists, like vandals in the dark, set fire to homes, mosques, banks, and government buildings. Flames consumed the city's tranquility, driving the death toll ever higher. According to Iranian state media, 111 security personnel have been killed in the clashes. On January 14th, the foreign minister confirmed that the total death toll from related incidents has reached hundreds. Hospitals are overwhelmed, where pain and despair intertwine, serving as the heaviest footnote to this turmoil. Iran's internal turmoil has long drawn attention from across the ocean. Former U.S. President Trump has kept a close watch on this unstable region, repeatedly stating that direct U.S. intervention would follow if the Iranian government failed to control the unrest. He also raised the question of whether Iran would become the next Venezuela. His ambiguous statements have added another layer of uncertainty to the situation. The U.S. Navy's Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group quietly redeployed to the Middle East, while American bases in Qatar and elsewhere began evacuating non-essential personnel. Regional tensions hung like a heavy cloud over the Middle East. External interference has never ceased. A January 9th report by Israel's Channel 14 added another pebble to the turbulent waters. Musk has provided Starlink services to the Iranian people. These circulating Starlink terminals, like faint gleamers piercing the internet blackout, have built information bridges for protesters while also becoming channels for external forces to infiltrate. Meanwhile, Iranian authorities raced against time to quell the unrest during the internet blackout window. By January 14th, they declared control over the national situation, and Tehran's streets returned to calm. Yet the scars left by this storm will take a long time to heal. Today's Iran resembles a ship catching its breath after weathering a violent storm. Domestic order is gradually being restored, yet deep-seated economic ailments, social fractures, and external threats lurk ahead like hidden reefs. This storm, ignited by a currency collapse, was ultimately the inevitable outcome of intertwined internal and external contradictions. Whether Iran can navigate its way out of this predicament remains an unanswered question.